earlier you mentioned that the Israeli government is governed under PR, proportional representation.
Yep.
I didn't know that, so I appreciate you informing us of that.
Yep.
If anybody can correct me if I'm wrong, if I remember right, when Trudeau was first elected in 2015,
Yep.
one of his election promises was election reform and proportional representation. And I hear a lot of people still wanting reform at least, and a lot of people want proportional representation. Is that something that's hopeless to expect from the Liberal government at this point, going forward before an election? Or?
Yeah. Look, I don't think we're not going to have a change in our electoral system before the next federal election. I'm not the Prime Minister. I'm not in cabinet, but I can safely say that's just not going to be on the table. But we had this. I had about a lot of conversations on this because there was a motion put forward by I believe it was Lisa Barron from the NDP to form a citizens' assembly. It was called M86, and it was a vote that I voted for at second reading. Ultimately abstained on the third reading, and it failed. I had about 15 calls to my office. People, if you generally write out, I do try to call back. I know Rob, sometimes I get voicemails, and we keep our best to stay on top of calls. But what the motion called for was an assembly to consider electoral reform. I wasn't in Parliament from 2015 to 2019, but this was studied extensively. There is certainly a movement and a desire, I think, amongst at least half the population to examine a different voting system. Very difficult to actually converge on what that is. What was on offer in 2015 to 2019 in that Parliament was a ranked ballot that would actually allow for more choice for people when they go. The NDP and the Greens at the time rejected that concept of a ranked ballot. And my personal view on this, because I have been, not forced, but because of the debate, we've had to think about a lot about this. I think a ranked ballot would be a good benefit. When you look at proportional representation, here's my concern. I just talked to you about the Israeli Knesset and how they don't even have ridings. Like, you're just strictly elected on a party list and you go in based on that. I think there's something actually beneficial about our system, because here we are sitting here tonight, and I'm directly responsible and accountable to you and people in Kings Hands. Part of what we're doing today is, Sam, you come and ask me questions, you're one of my constituents. I like that direct representation. I think it's important. Atlantic Canada is right now overrepresented in the House of Commons. We have about 10% of the seats in the House. We have about 7% of the national population. I can tell you firsthand, it is not easy to be able to make issues that are specific to the Atlantic region become absolute national priorities, even within our caucus. I'll give, before Christmas, you would have saw some of my work around adjustments to the carbon price, an increase in the rural rebate, an exemption on home heating oil for 3 years while we rolled out an enhanced heat pump program. That was a program that will make a difference across the country. It was particularly a pertinent issue in Atlantic Canada. It was not easy to be able to get movement on those things. So what I worry about a proportionate moving towards that model of a PR is that it would open up the conversation that Atlantic Canada's requisite voice in the Federation, as it relates to the House of Commons, would become less and less. Where I can tell you, after 5 years doing this job, it's not easy to elevate those issues already within the parliamentary structures that we have. I also think it gives a voice to some real extreme parties. Now, I started this conversation tonight by saying that I'm a centrist. Someone down the middle that tries to draw from both sides. I think there's good ideas out there, but generally I fit kind of as a moderate. Would I be as perplexed to see Elizabeth May have a few more seats in the House? Not so much. But I don't want to see Max Bernier with the People's Party in Canada have more seats. Now, if you take that perspective, I think that it is important and incumbent on parties to try to bring people together and to try to be able to have enough requisite support to actually get voted into the House. I don't think we need any more extreme in our politics. I see what's going on in certain parties in Europe. You referenced Israel. You could look at, I think we want to have ways that actually bring people together, and a ranked ballot would give people more choice. It would give people more ability to go in and say, this is my absolute preference of who I want, but I can live with this individual as a candidate if not. And I think there's a way to do that without going down the line to proportional. So the reason I abstained on M86 was because I think that there is some need to look at electoral reform. Particularly, I would be in preference of a ranked ballot. But Also, the reason why I didn't vote for it is because I think it's disingenuous in this time frame. Like, we're not going to have a system in place before the next election. And also, the polling right now shows that it's not that favorable for us. It would look a bit disingenuous to try to set up a system that may be electorally favorable in the short term on the basis that somehow that was the case. But remember, it was on the table. This was here. And the Prime Minister had acknowledged that that was part of the SACA conversation, the Supply and Confidence Agreement, that we were willing to explore a ranked ballot, which in certain parts of the country would really favor other parties other than the Liberals. In other parts of the country, actually, a Liberal vote share in some ways can knock off NDP or Green candidates that would be more likely to win in certain areas of the country. I also think, as a Member of Parliament, I mean, I had 45% of the vote here in Kings Hants of those who cast ballots in 2021. Proud of that number. Like, that's not a small amount amongst those who voted, but it would be nice in theory to kind of have a 50+1. You have to be able to get across that threshold that enough people actually view you as an acceptable choice to be the Member of Parliament. I think there's merit to that.
And I'm a little bit of a critic of the idea of PR for similar reasons to you say. I'm worried about losing local representation because of getting it in exchange for proportional representation for all the parties. But I'm just still curious, is electoral reform or proportional representation something that you hear much talk about from the inside?
Well, not necessarily from the inside. I mean, right now, most of what I come through my office is affordability, it's international conflict and how Canada can respond. There's been a lot of conversations from my constituents, I'm talking, Sam, about defense and a changing world built environment. We haven't talked much about that today. I was born in 1991. It was the fall of the Soviet Union. At that time, Berlin Wall had been coming down 2 years before. There was this idea that it was the end of ideology, that Western liberal democracy, that viewpoint had kind of won out. With Russia's terrible invasion into Ukraine and what we're seeing in conflicts around the world, I think Canada has to be prepared to be able to defend its own sovereignty, to be able to work with allies to secure peace and freedom and our interests. And you look at the prospect, I mean, look, people will know probably where I stand on what I would like to see out of the American presidential election, particularly with Trump's comments on the fact that he is mused about the idea of not supporting NATO allies that somehow don't have the funding. Like, we can no longer rely on the United States and its military umbrella to be supporting our North American security. We need to make sure. Our government actually has probably a better story than most people in this room would give us credit for. Defense spending has increased every year under this government since we took over from the Harper Conservatives. Most people don't know that. Spending has gone from 1% of GDP on defense to 1.4%. There's more work to be done in terms of making sure our Canadian Armed Forces are there, but yeah, I'm sorry, we got from PR to defense spending, sorry, but...
no worries, I appreciate the conversation.
But yeah, I think it's important, and I hear you on electoral reform. I don't hear a lot of it coming through. I know it's important to segments of the population, and I think we want to encourage people to get out. Again, with a ranked ballot, you, for example, could say, Sam, Kody, he's not a bad guy. I hope that's what you would say, but, I really want this person to be my #1 candidate. But I could live with Kody down ballot. I think that would allow for more elements. I think it would also mean that candidates have to be more pragmatic. It doesn't mean that I'm just chasing 40% of a certain type of demographic to the detriment of 60%. And the way I've tried to be a Member of Parliament in Kings Hants, I would argue that our communities, they are diverse, but most people are reasonable, moderate people. They don't like extremes too far other ways. There would be some people that do, of course, but on the whole. So I've tried to be someone that is not really extreme one way or the other. I think having a ranked ballot would mean candidates of other parties would have to be open, acceptable to voters that may not be exactly part of their base, so to speak. And I think that that's a good thing about bringing us together. I want to take maybe one final question, and then I'm happy to mull around and stick around forever. Thank you again for coming in.